John asked me to do that album cover kind of out of the blue. And that was my first experience drawing wrestlers or doing research into wrestling at all. And that was a very specific time period of wrestling that he wanted to depict. Early 80s West Coast territory wrestling, pre-Vince McMahon, pre-WWE, whatever.
Pre-consolidation.
Yeah. So, and when it was a lot more gritty, just visually. So it was a lot of fun for me to research and play around with. But no, I had no background drawing wrestlers. I have a background in martial arts and dance, so I had a lot of physical movement experience to draw on in my work, but not wrestling specifically.
Is there a connection at all? Did that like spur this on? Was that at the genesis of wrestling finally kind of making its way into this book?
Yes, I think because I realized how much I enjoyed drawing sweaty bodies in motion. It was so much fun drawing wrestling. And it's funny, when I try to think back, I have tried to remember when that came into the book and that character came into my writing. And I don't remember. It must have been so organic that maybe she was always there. It seemed like a really good way of depicting a trauma response, like a coping mechanism.
What about her coping specifically? The wrestling, you mean?
Yeah.
I went back and reread the PTSD strip that you did, and there's definitely there are aspects of physical movement. As you said, you're a dancer, but almost finding a way to use your body to, I guess, to cope.
Yeah, well, I was a dancer. I should say I quit in 2017 in the early stages of working on this book, although that was not connected. Well, yeah, I mean, your body's the thing that's having the experience, whatever experience it is. So you have to include it. You're not a brain in a jar, you know?
I changed therapists recently, so this is something that I've been talking to my new one about a lot. You also wrote about EMDR, and I had a few conversations with her and my old therapist about somatic response. That form of therapy, which deals with where trauma is carried in the body.
Yeah, I'm not so sure what I think of that. I'm also totally not an expert in any way, so no one should ever listen to my opinions about it. I genuinely don't know. Like, I don't know whether there's scientific backing for that and what people's experience of it is. I think I've heard that for so many years, and when I remember being in my 20s in the 1990s and having friends bring that up and thinking like, okay, well, or even saying very specific things like I carry my trauma in my right hip. I'm like, I have an open question about that, you know?
Yeah,
maybe.
It sounds like they're carrying it in like a pocket or a fanny pack.
Right? I mean, but I don't want to dismiss it at all. I never want to dismiss people's experiences of themselves and of therapy. I am not a good candidate for therapy, period.
Why is that?
Because my mother is a therapist. So
my mother is a Jewish psychotherapist, so I think that we probably could spend a lot of time on that specific topic. Yeah.
Well, I mean, not only because of that, it's also just, I found talk therapy to be not the best modality for me. I see how it helps other people a lot. I think I'm already a very analytical person with a lot of people to talk to. I like action. Like give me really structured action items, and train me in some specific communication techniques, and I can get a lot done.
Yeah.
Solve a lot of problems.
And I think this probably relates a lot to my mother, but of being almost overly analytical to the point where it can actually be a problem and like a kind of paralysis in and of itself.
Totally. And like if you're already a cerebral person from a cerebral culture, you know, maybe there's other modalities out there for you, you know.
Why did you end up moving back up north?
Well, a bunch of reasons. In 2019, I kind of opened my eyes and looked around me at Florida and at Gainesville, and I realized I cannot raise my daughter there. I just started to notice the way that my friends with older daughters were talking about their kids' experiences. Like I had one friend who said, oh, you know how it is when girls start high school, they immediately get depressed and start getting sexually harassed all the time. And I was like, wait, what? No, No, I don't know how. That's not how it is. Is that how it is here? That's not how it was where I grew up. So, and I kind of started to finally really notice how everything was still, felt to me anyway, like it was run by this white Baptist old boys network behind the scenes, maybe. Like maybe it's not the face of things, but it really felt like these are still the people in control. And then the pandemic happened. So I was already my wheels were turning. I was thinking about how much I really wanted to be back in New England. I lived in Boston for 10 years, and I was thinking, that's a good place to raise a kid. Like that's a place where education is highly valued and very diverse. I was noticing how white the schools were, how segregated the town still felt. And of course, the North is very segregated too. But if I were to send my child to public school in Gainesville, it would be not diverse at all.
I heard that.
Yeah, I know you heard that. I thought you were selling Girl Scout cookies.
No, because no one was buying them.
Because it's cold. You want to be part of this interview? I don't mind that you heard that. It's the truth.
She's the only one in the immediate family that I haven't interviewed now at this point.
Well, that'll come. The pandemic happened and everything kind of ground to a halt like it did for everybody. And, no one could think about the future. But it became obvious that how bad things were getting in Florida. The fascism was becoming very visible. So all of these things that I had sort of had an inkling about in 2019 that made me want to get us all out of there at what I thought was going to be a relatively slow pace, suddenly became very glaringly visible. And then the breaking point was the first weekend of June. Tom took Molly Rose to the kids' Black Lives Matter march. And while they were out, I was home and I started seeing reports that there were trucks flying Confederate flags, running people off the road in Micanopy, which is the next town over. And allegedly, one was circling the kids' march. I don't know if that was accurate or not. I didn't ask. But it was like the epigenetic switch flipped. Like all of the lessons learned from my family about knowing when it's time to leave.
Yeah.
Which my family did not, because who could have, right? In the 1930s in Poland, nobody thought Germany was going to invade until they did, as far as I know. At least certainly not, people living in a small town in southeastern Poland like my family. So it was like an instantaneous, put the house on the market, update the passports, pack the bags, and get the fuck out.
Yeah.
And we were out of it by August 2020. I could never have predicted how bad things were going to get there.
Yeah.
So it surprised me every week.
The governor is certainly not helping things down there.
The governor is a white nationalist, and no one is talking about that in the national press. Before he was elected, that was something that people in Florida were talking about. And people are normalizing him now as a serious politician. I mean, I don't, who knows what kind of legs his career has at this point, now that people have actually seen how unpleasant he is.
It was very funny, like realizing on a national level, which is what a charisma black hole that man is.
I mean, that's the bitter laugh that I can have, because he's completely destroyed a place that I loved and continues to wreak havoc on the lives of everyone there, especially the most vulnerable.
How quick was that timeline from the march to you actually like pulling up your stakes and leaving town?
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah.
That's a quick turnaround to just completely uproot your life like that. Yes,
it is. When I want to do something, I'm very single-minded about it.
Yeah. What's the process like? I mean, especially, you and Tom being tied to the school down there. Well, I suppose during the pandemic, you could at least move a lot of the classes virtually at that point.
Yeah. Well, so Tom was really smart. He had already, he didn't know he was being smart when he did this, but he had already started building a really robust online presence for the school. And so when the pandemic happened, they were already there, ready to pivot to online completely. Now it's a mix. So there's a brick and mortar school, and then there's the online classes.
You ended up in Providence specifically because of RISD.
No, actually, I did not have a job at RISD when I moved here. I was still teaching at University of Florida was teaching remotely for fall of 2020. No, we chose Providence because Boston has become unaffordable. If I'd had my ideal dream come true move, it would have been to Cambridge. I loved living in Cambridge. Those are a great bunch of years. It's a nice place to be, but it's okay. You know, Providence is nice. It's a cool little town, and I love teaching at RISD. That was just a really nice thing that happened, really because of Ariel Bordeaux, who was a librarian at RISD for many years and connected me with the chair of the illustration department there.
Are you teaching comics there?
Yeah, I'm teaching when there's space for it in the schedule. I'm teaching comics and graphic novels. There's always a comics component to whatever class I'm teaching. I teach some of the concepts classes for sophomores, and I'm also teaching in the MFA program. So that's a more freeform kind of advising students one-on-one on their projects. Right now, I'll be expanding my MFA classes next year, and I do a lot of one-on-one independent studies in comics as well.
I was thinking about this earlier, reading an interview that you were doing where, you know, that it's a very familiar story for anybody who's over the age of, I don't know, probably like 40, that went to art school, didn't teach comics, had to study something else. But I wonder if there's obviously studying painting, like really deeply informed the work you do. And it seems like it afforded you the ability to almost approach the medium from a different angle.
Yeah, I trained as a painter. There's a lot of stuff in my background through study and interest, both, that did not come into my work for a long time. I sort of siloed it off for 20 years and pretended it never happened. And then it all sort of came rushing back in my 40s. So I've become much more of a multidisciplinary artist and a person much more interested in the multidisciplinary as well. Like as an audience member.
Why did you silo it off?
I had a painting teacher who she hated me and she did not want me to keep painting. And she succeeded in making me stop painting for 20 years. That was sort of an inciting incident when I was very young and vulnerable. Took me a long time to recover from it. And the only way that I sort of climbed back out of what that experience caused for me was by just deciding to be an illustration major a few years later. I remember thinking, you know, I had quit school and I was taking some time off. I was waiting tables and doing other jobs. And I thought, you know, I can't do this indefinitely. I was also drawing comics that whole time. I remember thinking, I can't do this indefinitely. I need to figure out how to get paid to draw pictures. That's how I became an illustrator. And I did that for a really long time. And I was just very focused on that hustle, because it's a real hustle. And for most people, it's kind of a short-lived career because your style is only really relevant for a certain amount of time. For me, it was also no longer interesting after a certain point to do that kind of work. But luckily, I had already long ago mostly become a person who makes comics. So when I came back to it, when I started bringing my painting training into my comics, that completely changed my artistic practice and made me a very different artist. Now I'm starting to go more in the direction of painting, just solely painting, which has been really nice.
Getting tired or not wanting to, I guess, getting bored with illustration, was that a product of all the work being for hire?
No, I never did work for hire. No one ever wanted to pay me enough to do work for hire. Like, pro tip, if somebody is going to ask you to do a work for hire job, it has to be at least 5 figures for that kind of work and that kind of headache. No, it was that I was a totally different person. I mean, doing illustration work started to feel shallow to me, doing editorial illustration. And, you know, that's lucky for me because I had someplace else to go artistically. I felt like I was never going deep enough and never really fulfilling what I actually wanted to do as an artist. I really enjoyed it for a long time. And I will still do things that kind of resemble illustration for people who really want my work. But it's usually like a friend wants me to do a tour poster for their band, or someone wants me to design a tattoo for them or something. Like, that's different. We'll leave the editorial illustration for the young, That's probably more fun for them. Whatever illustration jobs were left, It just didn't feel like me anymore.
I assume that's how the two Mountain Goats albums came about.
Yeah, that was just purely John asking me to illustrate them. And that was a blast. Like, that was like an artistic collaboration, that was really fun.
What's your sense of why you've gotten even more fully into painting? What does that afford you that you're not getting in comics?
It's just different. There's no better, I'm doing both at the same time. Painting is just a different art form. It's like the difference between, I don't know, punk and classical music or something. They're just different. They serve different moods, different spectrums of experience.
How would you describe the mood and experience of painting versus comics?
Well, it's not free from narrative, but I'm not trying to depict a recognizable narrative. And it's not sequential. So I can work out a lot of ideas that I might be carrying around for a graphic novel in a single image that may convey them in a different way. A lot of it is also the process experience of painting, the physical experience of painting, which is something I get a lot out of in comics as well. But when I'm painting, I'm working really big. So I'm standing. It's physically very, very different. I'm zooming in and out between very far away and very close. And I'm not sure what direction it's going to go at this point. We'll see.
Do you mean there's a sense of physicality in it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it not just a sense, like, it's a physical act. No, it's a completely engaging physical act.
Having just stopped dancing, whether this is filling some of that void for you.
No, I don't think so. Painting was one of the first things I ever did as a person. It's a very, very old thing for me, probably older than physical movement. No, stopping dancing was a totally fine thing. I lift weights now. I mean, I always lifted weights, but now that's like a thing I'm a little more focused on.
It is that thing of needing to fill that with something. I have a degenerative disc disease, and I've not been able to exercise for the last few months. And you don't really realize like how much it impacts your mood until you stop doing it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. That sucks. I hope you can get some help for that.
I got an epidural. I'm actually like back up and walking around, but
good.
I think it's just because like when you're younger and you can move more, you take it for granted, really.
I beat the crap out of myself until my body was not capable of taking it anymore. So in the last couple of years, I've developed a lot of pretty extreme chronic pain that I'm managing all the time. I have a lot of injuries, a lot of arthritis, a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. I look very able-bodied, but I don't feel very able-bodied. I don't move well anymore.
Is some of that a direct result of dancing?
Oh, yeah. No one tells you when you start dancing in restaurants that it's bad for your body. I mean, I was dancing on hard floors in ballroom shoes all the time and training constantly. I think some of it is also in my 20s, teens and 20s, I was a martial arts student. I got hurt a lot there. And, some other unfortunate things. In 2018, I was hit by a car, which it wasn't that bad. I was knocked off my bike. If I had been walking, she would have hit me in my side, very vulnerable place, and I probably would have been in the hospital. But she hit me in the hip and the knee, and I kind of landed on my hands and knees with my bike pretzeled around my knees. I think I twisted my knees pretty badly and I didn't really notice it. I've already injured my knees a bunch of times. So sort of like, okay, just get up and limp to where I was going. But then I had a really bad fall in the woods the next year in the snow. And I really injured my knee in a way that was kind of catastrophic and I've never recovered from. Like a lot of physical activity, a couple of accidents, a couple of pregnancies, like these things will add up over time.
Yeah. Do you miss dancing?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not one bit. Nope.
It always, whenever I ask that question, somebody has an answer like that. It always just amazes me of having like devoted so much of your life to this thing and then stopping it and just being totally cool with it.
But the thing that happened when I quit dancing was that a friend had asked me to start a band with them, and I immediately started doing that. So going from dancing to singing, which is another thing that I had not done in a very long time, felt like a really natural transition. And that was great. So it was really, I was ready to quit. I mean, there's so many reasons why that was a good thing. Yeah, I was just done. Sometimes you're just done with something.
Depending on the kind of music, singing can also be very physical.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a belter, so it was good.
I didn't know you were tell me about the bands. I didn't know you were in one.
It was a noisy art rock band. They were great. I think in our short time, we accomplished a lot.
It sounds like a very RISD experience.
It was not at RISD. It was in Gainesville, which was,
wow.
Gainesville was sort of a magical place in that it was possible to be a parent with a young child and studio practice and teaching part-time and also be in a band. I don't think I could sustain that. I couldn't sustain that here. Teaching at RISD is much more involved than teaching at University of Florida was. And, my kid is older and my career is a lot more absorbing, although it was pretty intense back then too. But it was really fun. We had a great time. We made an EP. We played a lot of shows. Everybody in that band was terrific.
When did you start work on this book?
I started work on this book in November of 2016, right after the presidential election, actually. Not because of it, just coincidentally started right
You say
that.
I don't know. Maybe subconsciously.
Well, I pitched it in June of 2016.
Okay.
And then, November was just the right time to start working on it.
I can't imagine that it didn't have some kind of impact on the book.
Well, I remember thinking early on, this is the kind of anti-fascist activism I can do, because I'm no longer a person who can physically go to marches. That's not a way that I can contribute. I don't have a lot of money to donate, although I do when I can. But this is my anti-fascist work. This is the way that it was already, from 2015 on, I was thinking a lot about rising fascism and the language around refugees that we use that's being deployed all over the world. That became very visible in 2015. So that was not the genesis of this book, but it was definitely in the mix when I started. The initial idea for the book came a lot earlier, way before I ever worked on it, in 2013. But by 2015, I was really, but I wasn't ready to work on anything big between 2012 and 2015, 16.
Was that just a result of having a young child, or?
No, it's just, the result of doing one big book, like, takes time to build up to another one. So, my style always changes in between books too. So, well, also, like, I released, I delivered Untersaken to the publisher, and then 2 weeks later, my first child died. So in 2012, I wasn't drawing anything. It was completely, the idea of drawing something was utterly meaningless. In 2013, I started making short nonfiction comics, and that really picked up speed. And actually, the person that I owe a lot to there is Vanessa Davis, the cartoonist, who was the person who I was complaining to her one night that I didn't have any good ideas for short nonfiction work. And that seemed like a really good thing to pitch to people, but I didn't have anything to pitch. And she was like, Leela, you just told me like 5 stories that would be great pitches. And I thought, oh, you're right, actually. And I went home and I wrote them out as pitches and I pitched them, and like 3 of them got picked up immediately. So thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something that nice for Vanessa one of these days.
This change of style between books, how conscious of a decision is that?
It's a pretty organic thing that happens. The only place that I would point to that is conscious about it is that I usually know when an idea needs a different style. Like with Untersaken, I had the idea initially in 2003, but I knew that I wasn't really a mature enough cartoonist yet. As an artist, I wasn't a good enough artist yet to do that book. So I had to kind of spend a few years working up to it. With Victory Parade, that style had already been established in my nonfiction work. The pivotal piece is the PTSD comic that you mentioned. That's the first time I ever made a comic in watercolor. And that really changed everything. So by the time I was working on Victory Parade, it was already a very organic thing. Like, this is my style now. And that, I'm guessing, will be more true of the next book as well.
That it'll be another departure?
No, that it'll probably be less of a departure. It'll probably look more like the style of Victory Parade. But I don't know for sure. I won't know till I do it.
Is the process more time consuming to paint?
Well, yeah, I would say it is. But I also, the process of making comics is time consuming. And because no one gets enough money to focus exclusively on it, nor do most people want to focus exclusively on it. At least, not me. I have a life that I enjoy outside of comics as well. I love teaching, and I have a family. And, I like to leave the house occasionally, take a walk, maybe go to the park.
It's not very cartoonist of you. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, that's an old stereotype that I think we can let go of at this point. There's a generation of mostly men in comics who were very invested in that idea of cartoonists as socially awkward and incapable of anything else. And that's bullshit. I love all the cartoonists that I think of as advancing that stereotype. I think they're all amazing, but I just think that that's just not how most people are living in this field. We're actually a bunch of pretty nice, well-adjusted people with a lot of friends.
Yeah, I will say that some of the best parties I went to were either at Bill Cardelopoulos' loft in Brooklyn or at SPX.
Yeah, see? The thing, comics is great. This is something I try to really emphasize with my students. Comics happens in community, and you're going to get your entire life from your community of artists. Romantic relationships, friendships, jobs, these things happen within your community, and there's so much support in comics. It's such a uncompetitive field, which is nice for me. I really hate competition. It shuts me down. I never liked going to Illustrator events, Illustrator events where you're sort of meet and greet in a meet and greet situation with art directors or something. That's like crabs in a barrel. Comics is not like that. But in any case, if somebody gave me a large enough advance, maybe I would take some time off and really just only work on my comics. But even then, I don't want to lose my teaching job. I really like it. It's time consuming in that watercolor takes a while. It's slow. It takes time to dry between layers. And I like using a lot of layers and viscosity. But I can't really work in black and white ink right now. Since I started working in watercolor, when I work in ink, it's there's so much resistance, and it feels so empty of expression to me. I can't get to where I want to go with it. So I think it would take a lot longer if I tried to go back to working in black and white, because I wouldn't be enjoying it.
That makes sense. It also makes sense mentioning that you were getting more into just straight painting, because there are a number of, I wouldn't even call them panels, but there are a number of moments in this book that feel like a painting. in terms of like a standal, like a shot that sort of stands on its own.
Yeah. Well, there's some splash pages specifically. Are you referring to those?
Yeah. I read it as a PDF, so it might have. It might have lessened my. But even with that, like, it was still clear that there were these sort of like almost static moments in time.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's common in comics as well.
It is, but it also, I can certainly point to a number of cartoonists who do this well. Nate Powell does it really well. As far as, but I think there's an extra layer that you're afforded, and this was striking to me reading your book when it comes to those dream moments or those fantasy moments. There's something about the fluidity of paint that really lends itself well into blurring the line between reality and dreams. Yeah,
very much so.
They're really it seems like the dreams are a central aspect of the processing of trauma in this book.
Certainly. A lot of my goal in this book was to depict the kind of in-between states of consciousness and dreams and death. I was thinking a lot about how people process collective trauma on an individual level. That's kind of the thematic underpinning of the whole book.
You described it to me a moment ago as being an anti-fascist action that you could participate in. Is that part of the book pitch? Is that something that you actually talked to when you? Okay.
No.
I suspected
I don't
not.
actually clearly remember the pitch. I think I was pretty straightforward about it. But I might have said something like, I want to talk about what the inevitable result of dehumanizing people.
Yeah.
People were very reluctant to hear the word fascism in 2016, and they still are.
Something you said to Meg Lemke with the Publishers Weekly interview really jumped out at me, but that there was no intention for this to be a Holocaust book. But it was, it was going to be adjacent no matter what, just because of the time period it took place in, right?
Well, that's how it became a Holocaust book, because I knew I couldn't avoid it. If I was going to make a book that was set during the Second World War, your pet rabbit is very cute, by the way.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, she's jumping around behind you. Very cute. Yeah, and the thing that happened also when I started making short comics was that I started working in the Holocaust space anyway. So I was kind of back in there anyhow.
Thinking about the book in context of and I noticed that you mentioned this on social media, but the speech that Jonathan Glazer gave at the Oscars, in the lead up to that movie coming out, this is clearly from people who didn't read the book that it's based on, but I heard some pushback or read some pushback online, like putting out a Holocaust, like why put out a Holocaust movie at this point, given everything that's happening in Gaza. But obviously it doesn't even require a close reading of that movie to see the parallels to what's going on with the Palestinian people.
Yes, I agree. And I really hope that people will give my book that same read. Because what I'm not trying to do is, I think there are two sort of broad sets of houses, I guess, of reaction in Holocaust descendants, and maybe more broadly in Jewish communities too. And obviously there's more than two, but specifically here, I think there are those of us who treat the Holocaust as something that belongs only to us and get very insular about it. And then there are those of us who see it in the continuum of atrocities that humans commit on one another, which are all different from one another. They're not, people get so competitive about it, which is so weird to me. Like, we can talk about the Holocaust and the ways in which it was unique or exceptional, but we can also do that with other genocides, and we can connect. All of these genocides are connected. The darkness that's in our species is the darkness in our species. It's not limited to one or two groups of people, and no one is exempt from it, including Jews. We are not exempt from mistreating people. We're just like every other goddamn human being. So yeah, I hope people will give it that read. I do feel a little awkward about it because I'm worried that I'll get that same reaction, but smart people will know. I may have said this to Meg too in this interview, so forgive me if this is redundant, but one of the other reasons why it was important to me to use the Holocaust as a way of talking about now, what's happening right now, is that I really felt like I needed to stay in my own lane culturally. It's not my place to tell the story of another culture's experience. You know, if I were to do a book about the Cambodian genocide, it would be very appropriative and wrong-headed of me, right? Or any other experience that's not my own. And I'm not saying that people need to only make work that's about their own personal or cultural experiences, but this is kind of a big one. Like, you know, I'm carrying my corner of humanity's coffin with this book.
And it really comes out in a major way toward the end of the book when the husband comes home. And I'm curious, you know, again, saying that you didn't set out to write a book about that subject, but also when we were speaking of the Ruby's her name, the wrestler, that she kind of entered the picture at some point in the process. Do you write chronologically?
I wish. I really wish I did. I'd love to talk to people about that. Like, I want to get a sense of who writes chronologically and who doesn't. I have my suspicions about who does and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll text some friends and ask them. But no, at some point while working on Victory Parade, I realized that I make comics the way I was trained to paint, which is all over the canvas all at the same time. You don't hyper focus on one area for too long. You kind of bring the whole thing up as you go.
Which it helps if there's a lot of intersecting stories.
I guess. I mean, you know, when I think about writers who handle really complex structures in their stories, like the writer Kate Atkinson. Have you ever read her work?
I know the name. Yeah.
She's a British writer who writes sometimes things that are classified as mysteries, but they're really something else. She's so good at what I guess is something mystery writers do too, which is just creating this very complicated intersecting set of narratives. It's like one of those palaces made of toothpicks. If you pull one, the whole thing falls, right? But it's perfection when she does it. It all works. Or like I'm watching the adaptation of Three Body Problem right now, which admittedly I haven't read the books. I bet they're great. I will read them. But that's also a complex, multi-layered story that takes place in a couple of time frames, and multiple characters and consciousnesses. And it's not all that successfully done, but when it is, it's really, really well done. And it really comes together really well. I don't think I'm doing that. I think my work is more chaotic and kind of lowercase than that.
I should ask Alex Segura about this because he exclusively writes mystery books now. There's that cliche of writing backwards, like writing from the end, writing from the resolution of the mystery.
Yeah, maybe that's a good trick to try next time. You know, my next book. Well, in the next book I'm making, I am sort of doing that, kind of. Yes and no.
I've heard this from a lot of different artists and writers, but Jeff Smith famously had the last panel of Bone figured out, and then he had to work his way to it. And that's always struck me as a really fascinating way to do things.
The last panel ever of the ultimate total end of Bone. Damn, that's really ambitious.
He created it. He created the characters when he was. I really hope I'm remembering this correctly, but I think I am.
Why let the truth get in the way of a good story?
Yeah, of them kind of like riding off into the sunset on the cart like that.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I mean, I think that can be a really formally powerful choice to make. That might be a good thing to try as an assignment, honestly, for students. You know, something shorter than that brick you just showed me.
It'd be a very long semester if that was the case.
I know.
You're going to have to keep me up to date on this. I'm really curious. I know you're about to do in April, you're going to do some dates with the book. I'm curious what the conversations will be like pertaining to like what we were just talking about, with it being a book about the Holocaust written by a Jewish woman in this moment.
I mean, same, I started it in a very different time than the one we're living in now. I mean, I guess I have Jonathan Glazer's example to draw on.